Hi, welcome to the Completed Ticket Challenge. My name is Matt Fox. I'm the VP of TopLeft, and for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to be teaching you what you can do in your MSP to take back control of your work in progress and to make habits in your team that encourage your technicians to finish work before they start new work. That's going to have a real benefit for you and your technicians and for your customers too. So the goal for this week is just to get some good visualizations of the work that you have right now. Things like showing your pipeline. What are the key stages in the workflow that you're concerned with? Service workflow or project workflow. We're going to look at which tickets are in which stages and see which tickets are neglected and which tickets have been touched recently and things like that. So today what we're going to do is just make your first Kanban board, and we're going to consider how to set up the board, but we're actually not going to worry about the tickets that appear on the board, whether they're in the correct statuses or they're uh, they're too big or they're neglected. We're just going to look at the configuration of the board itself. We're going to keep it simple. The board will have no swim lane. Keep the filters basic, just what you need to do to show the right tickets on that board. And we're going to be focusing on the columns because that's one of the key things that you're going to need to get right in order to understand where your work is at in your pipeline. Now, if you're new to the TopLeft application, in the email, there's a link to another video where I actually show you the mechanics of exactly like where to click to actually create that Kanban board. So if you need to, go look at that video and then you'll see what to do. Now, for thinking of which columns we have on the board, think of the life cycle of a ticket. Um, it's going to it's going to begin its life in a new status or planning, maybe. It's going to end its life in closed or completed. And between there, it's going to go through a series of stages. So think about kind of a good ticket. What happens to a good ticket? What stages does it go through from the first stage to the final stage? Here are some examples of stages, or these would end up as columns on your Kanban board. These have been used at a lot of MSPs with a lot of success. So they are just examples. You may have others that you need. Some of these that I'm going to mention you may not need, but for some inspiration, listen to some good examples that MSPs have used with a lot of success. So the first one on the left would be new. That's typical for service, or planning for project. The next one could be ready. So that would be where a dispatcher or project manager indicates that this work is ready to be started by an engineer. Um, you may not need that if you have a workflow where technicians pull stuff straight out of the new status. Basically, you don't have a triage process, then you might not need the ready status. You're going to have a waiting column. That's one column where it indicates that the next step on these tickets are for somebody else outside of the team, waiting on customer, waiting on third party, something like that. Probably you're going to map multiple waiting statuses from your PSA. You're going to map it into the one waiting column. You might have a column for scheduled. So that's where we keep work that needs to be coordinated with somebody. And so we put it in the, select a time and we're going to do it with whoever else. And it goes into the calendar, and we know we don't have to do anything more for that ticket until we get to that day and time in the calendar. Then there's the in progress column. And now that is everything that a technician has started, and the next step is still in his or her court to do. And I'll talk more about that later because there's a point that's frequently misunderstood about in progress, and it leads to some of the problems that probably brought you here to the completed ticket challenge. Another one could be the working now column. So that's where if you need a way to indicate what the technician is working on at this very moment, you might call it working now, and you'll need a status in your PSA for that, but I'll say more about that one later too. There are some other ones like review and acceptance. If you have procedures for checking on a technician's work once they say it's done, you don't need to add those now if you don't already have them, but if you do have them already, then keep them. And then finally, completed or closed. Whether you have that on your Kanban board is totally up to you. Some people like to be able to review the work that's been completed. Some people don't think that's important, so that's entirely up to you. Now, a couple of little tips. There, you may have tickets that have kind of an unclear scope, and actually you would never really be expected to finish them. They're kind of like catch-all tickets for like project management or meetings or whatever. Yeah, where you don't want to make a new ticket for a recurring meeting. they just kind of stay open for a long time, and they're never really going to be done. That's fine. I know that's something I do that myself. Um, it can be useful to show that sort of work on the Kanban board, and if you do that, you may want to have a status in your PSA, a ticket status for ongoing. That's the term I use. There are other terms as well. And then you can make a column on your Kanban board for ongoing, and it just always sits over on the left side of the board. And everybody knows that tickets that are in the ongoing status column, there's no expectation that those move through the pipeline. They're just sitting there until maybe you refresh those tickets every so often. By the way, on the ordering of the board, you always want the tickets to move from the left side of the board to the right side of the board. That's typical for all Kanban board solutions. And that's just a pattern where we want to. It makes it easy to see, which tickets are at the beginning, which tickets are at the end, because they have a meaningful order of those columns. Now, in the completed ticket challenge, we're actually not going to think too much about what happens on the left side of the board, new, planning, and ready columns. We're actually going to focus a lot more on what happens on the right side of the board, the stuff that your team has already started. So if you feel like you have too much on the left side of the board, the new and planning stuff, there's a good chance that that's actually not due to any problems in the planning process, but it's more of a side effect of just how busy you are on the right side of the board. And so if we can tackle the problems that you have on the right side of the board, the in progress and waiting and scheduled and things like that, then that will have a good effect, and that might actually fix all the problems that you feel like you have on the left side of the board. So that's why we'll focus on that on the right side of the board. Okay, now here's what I wanted to mention about the in progress column and how it's frequently misunderstood to be to indicate what the engineer is doing at this very moment. Now, it could be that some teams have a good reason to indicate what a technician is doing at this very moment, but that's actually not that common. Usually, it's really not that critical to know what's the technician working on at this very moment. And so here's the problem. If a technician thinks that that's for indicating what they're working on at this very moment, then they'll put one ticket in there, whatever they're working on, and everything else that they've already started probably goes into the waiting column. And the problem with that is that now it's mixed in with all of the other work where the next step on that ticket is someone else's responsibility. So in one column, you have tickets that are mixed. The next step is from somebody outside of the team to do, as well as the technician stuff, and including this and that stuff that they've already started. Okay, so that makes it impossible to have one place where you can look to see everything that the technician has already started, but they haven't finished yet. It really hides that, and so it's kind of a way to lie to yourself and to your team about how much stuff is still in your court to do, and it makes it easier to think that you're in a good position to start new work when really you've got a lot of stuff you've started already, and you shouldn't be starting anything until you work down that queue of work. Okay, um, so that's why it's important to put everything that you've already started, and that's still in the next step is for the technician to do. That goes into the in progress column. Now, if you don't like the term in progress because that does sound like things that the technician is working on at this very moment, then you can use the term started. Some people do that. I kind of like that myself because that has no connotation that they're actually working on it at this very moment. Now, if you are in an environment where, for whatever reason, you do think it's important to know what the technician is working on at this very moment, then you might have a status. You would need to make a status, and you could have a Kanban column for it. You could call it working now, because that's perfectly clear that they're working on it at this very moment. And then whenever they start something, pull that ticket into that column. If they get pulled off of that and they have to go and start working on something else, they take that ticket that they got pulled off of, they put that back to the left a little bit into the in progress column, not to the waiting column, put it back to the in progress so that you can see everything that everything that the technician has started, and they still need to come back to that to finish that because we need to have one place where we can see that very, very clearly. Now, a note about the scheduled column. So, like I mentioned, that's things where we're not going to start that ticket just yet. The next step on that ticket happens at a certain time and day. So that can be for two reasons. One is because you need to coordinate it with somebody, and then the second reason could be that some MSPs use that technique to actually manage the work, meaning when a ticket is ready to start, dispatcher assigns it to a technician, and then puts it into some time in their calendar, and it goes into the scheduled status. So if you're doing that just for the sake of managing the work, that's okay for now. Continue doing that throughout this week, even into part of next week. But one of the days next week, we're going to stop doing that because that technique is a lot of work and it's very fragile, meaning if there's any changes, it kind of breaks a lot of things. And so we have better ways to do that. You're going to like them. It's a lot less work for you and your dispatcher, and we'll explain that next week. But for now, continue what you're doing and just put that those tickets in the scheduled column.